What if I told you that the loudest sound you'll ever make has nothing to do with your voice, but with your truth? Imagine a roar so powerful that it echoes long after you've left the room, long after your critics have gone silent, long after time itself has tried to erase you. That roar is your authenticity, and today, I'm here to show you how crossing from doubt to dominance begins with unleashing it. ChatGPT said, "Doubt is one of the most universal experiences a human being can face, yet it is also one of the most isolating. It doesn't always arrive in loud declarations. More often, it seeps in quietly, slipping through the cracks of your confidence when you least expect it. Life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It doesn't care about your preparation, your dreams, or your best intentions. It simply throws obstacles at you, sometimes subtle, sometimes brutal. And every time you stumble, every time you fall short, that little voice of doubt grows louder. You miss an opportunity you thought was yours, and doubt tells you that maybe you weren't cut out for it. Someone overlooks your efforts, and doubt whispers that maybe your work wasn't good enough to be noticed in the first place. A rejection letter arrives, and doubt grins, reminding you of every fear you already had about yourself. It's not just the failures that plant seeds of doubt, though. Sometimes it's the silence, the lack of recognition, the absence of validation. You give everything you have, you burn the midnight oil, you pour your heart into what you do, and no one says a word. That silence can be louder than any insult. It makes you question whether what you're doing even matters. Then there's the sharp sting of underestimation. People look at you and assume you can't handle a task, you can't bear the weight, you can't rise to the occasion. They size you up and decide your limits before you've even had the chance to show them who you are. Every one of those moments becomes a brick in the wall of doubt. And if you're not careful, that wall starts to close in, trapping you in a space that feels smaller and smaller. What makes doubt so dangerous is how personal it becomes. It doesn't just say you failed, it says you are a failure. It doesn't just point out a mistake. It tries to convince you that you are the mistake. It doesn't criticize your effort. It tears at your identity. That's the difference between constructive feedback and corrosive doubt. Feedback can guide you, refine you, and make you stronger. Doubt seeks to suffocate you, to convince you that you're powerless before you've even begun. Most people underestimate just how cunning doubt can be. It doesn't need dramatic failures to sink its claws in. A small moment, an awkward comment, a dismissive glance, a missed call, and spiral into hours of self-questioning. You replay the event in your mind, twisting it into evidence that supports your insecurity. The mind is a master at turning minor setbacks into monumental proof that you're not good enough. The more you feed that thought, the more it grows, until it feels like the truth. This cycle is brutal, and nearly everyone experiences it. The star athlete who's second guesses their performance despite years of training. The artist who wonders if their work will ever be worthy of attention. The entrepreneur who feels like an imposter even after reaching milestones that others would celebrate. Doubt spares no one. It doesn't care about your past victories, your accolades, or your reputation. It comes for all of us, because deep down, every human being has moments when they fear they are not enough. But here's what's often overlooked. Doubt is not proof of weakness. In fact, doubt usually strikes hardest when you are standing at the edge of growth. It doesn't show up when you're standing still. It appears when you're about to step forward, when you're stretching beyond your comfort zone, when you're daring to do something that matters. The very presence of doubt is often evidence that you're on the verge of change. It's the mind's way of clinging to safety, of warning you against risk, of begging you to stay small because staying small feels secure. Still, when you're in it, it doesn't feel like a sign of progress. It feels like a heavy chain around your chest. You wake up in the morning with hesitation instead of conviction. You start projects but never finish them because somewhere in the middle, the whispers of doubt convince you that finishing isn't worth it. You shrink your ambitions, editing your dreams down to something more manageable, more acceptable, less threatening. You play small, not because you want to, but because doubt has made you believe that small is all you deserve. This is why understanding the role of doubt is so crucial. If you can see it for what it is, reaction, not a reality, you strip it of some of its power. Doubt thrives in the shadows, feeding off your silence and your willingness to accept its lies without question. The moment you drag it into the light, when you name it, when you recognize it as part of the human experience rather than a reflection of your worth, you begin to weaken its grip. The truth is that every voice of doubt you've ever heard in your head has been built out of experiences that were designed to test you, not define you. The rejection letter, it wasn't proof of your inadequacy, it was redirection. The silence, it wasn't proof of invisibility. It was a reminder to validate yourself rather than waiting on others. The underestimation, it wasn't proof of your limits. It was an invitation to surprise everyone, including yourself. When you start to reinterpret the sources of doubt, you begin to see them as stepping stones instead of stumbling blocks. At its core, doubt is just part of the human condition. To live is to wrestle with it. What separates those who stay trapped from those who rise is not the absence of doubt, but the refusal to let it dictate their story. The world will always test you, sometimes cruelly, sometimes indifferently, and every test brings with it an echo of doubt. But it's how you answer that echo that decides where you end up. Fear is one of the most powerful forces in the human experience. But the strangest thing about it is how often it operates on illusions rather than reality. Fear rarely presents itself as a tangible enemy. More often, it builds invisible cages around you. Cages that aren't made of steel or concrete, but of hesitation, worry, and the belief that you might fail if you take another step forward. These cages feel real, they feel heavy. They convince you that there's no way out, that you're locked inside with no key. But if you look closer, you start to realize the bars are made of air. Fear is fragile, far more fragile than it appears, and the moment you call it out for what it is, those bars start to crack. The way fear builds these cages is almost always subtle. It starts with a single thought. What if I'm not ready? What if I'm not good enough? What if I make a fool of myself? That thought doesn't just disappear, it multiplies. Before long, one small worry turns into a chorus of hesitation. You hesitate to take the chance, you hesitate to speak up, you hesitate to step into the unknown. Each hesitation adds another bar to the cage, and before you know it, you've built an entire prison around yourself without even realizing you were doing it. It's not that life has trapped you. You've been tricked into trapping yourself. And yet, here's the irony, the thing you fear rarely has the power you think it does. Most of the time, the worst case scenarios we play in our heads never come true. The audience doesn't laugh at you when you stumble on your word. The project you've been holding back from starting doesn't end in disaster. The risk you were terrified to take doesn't always end in failure. But because fear paints the ugliest possible picture in your mind, you stay in the cage just to avoid the imagined pain. You end up suffering not from what actually happens, but from what your imagination convinces you might happen. Fear is fragile because it cannot survive contact with truth. The moment you take action, no matter how small, you shine light on the illusion. You realize the stage isn't as terrifying once you're standing on it. You realize people don't actually care as much about your mistakes as you thought they would. You realize that failure, while unpleasant, doesn't destroy you. It teaches you, but fear doesn't want you to know that. It thrives in inaction. It feeds on your avoidance. That's why its cages feel so real until you finally push against them and watch them fall apart. Think about how many lives are lived small, not because the people inside them lack talent, skill, or opportunity, but because they let fear dictate the boundaries of what's possible. Someone dreams of writing a book, but never starts because they fear rejection. Another person dreams of starting a business, but never takes the first step because they fear bankruptcy. A performer dreams of the stage, but never auditions because they fear humiliation. These cages are self-made, and the saddest part is that they are built around unreal outcomes that may never happen. The cost of staying inside the cage, however, is very real, a life half lived. Fear has another trick. It convinces you that the cage is keeping you safe, that as long as you don't step out, you won't get hurt. But what it doesn't tell you is that safety comes at the price of suffocation. You can't grow inside a cage. You can't expand. You can't test your limits. You can't discover who you really are when you never step into the unknown. Fear trades your freedom for comfort, and it disguises stagnation as protection. The truth is, it's not protecting you. It's paralyzing you. There's a reason fear collapses the moment you act. It never had the strength you thought it did. Fear is like smoke. It looks solid from a distance. It clouds your vision. It makes you choke if you let it fill your lungs. But when you walk through it, you realize there was nothing solid there at all. The only way to know this, though, is to move. To test the cage, to push against the bars, to discover for yourself that the prison was never locked. Every great story of triumph carries with it a moment when someone chose to step through their fear instead of living under it. Athletes, leaders, creators, innovators, all of them felt the cage closing in. All of them heard the voice of fear telling them they couldn't, shouldn't, or wouldn't. The difference between those who rose and those who stayed trapped wasn't that the fear disappeared. It was that they walked through it anyway. They realized the bars couldn't hold them once they chose to act. This is why courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move despite it. If you wait for fear to go away, you'll wait your entire life, because fear never leaves on its own. It lingers as long as you let it. But when you step forward, when you take the risk, when you decide that your growth matters more than your comfort, fear shatters. The cage disappears, and you realize you were always free. The power of fear lies in the story it tells you. It convinces you that the worst will happen, that you'll collapse under the weight, that you'll be laughed at or forgotten or broken. But fear is a liar. It is fragile, it is hollow, and it cannot stand against the force of truth backed by action. The only way to prove this is to roar against it, to break the silence it thrives on, and to walk forward even when your knees are shaking. Every time you do, the cage crumbles, and you reclaim the freedom that was yours all along. Breaking free from doubt or fear doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen because the world suddenly becomes easier, or because someone hands you the validation you've been waiting for. It happens in a single moment of decision when you finally realize that your truth outweighs every voice of hesitation, every imagined failure, and every judgment thrown at you. That choice is the dividing line between being trapped and being free, between living in the shadows and stepping into your own light. It doesn't mean you stop being afraid or that you silence doubt forever, but it does mean you stop letting those voices dictate what you do next. Choice is the most powerful tool a person has, yet it's also the one most often underestimated. People wait for courage to arrive like a wave that sweeps them forward, not realizing that courage doesn't come first. Choice does. You choose to step forward, and then courage follows. You choose to act despite fear, and then confidence builds. Waiting for everything to feel right before you act is like waiting for a fire to burn without ever striking a match. The moment of transformation is not in the feeling but in the decision. Think of every major breakthrough in human life, whether personal or historical, and you'll find the same core pattern. Someone reached a point where the pain of staying the same became greater than the fear of change. They decided that the truth burning inside them was more important than the comfort of silence, more powerful than the weight of judgment. That decision unleashed everything else. The artist who finally shares their work, the speaker who steps onto the stage, the leader who dares to break tradition, all of them reached that moment of choice when holding back was no longer bearable. The beauty of choice is that it doesn't have to be grand to be life-changing. It's often made in small, quiet ways, in the stillness of a late night when you're staring at the ceiling wondering if your life will ever change. It's made in the morning when you decide to get up and push forward instead of giving up. It's made in the conversations where you finally speak what's in your heart instead of staying silent to keep others comfortable. Each of these decisions, though they may seem ordinary, carry the weight of transformation because they remind you that you are not powerless. You are not at the mercy of fear or doubt. You hold the key. What makes this so difficult is that choice demands responsibility. The moment you decide, you eliminate excuses. You can no longer blame hesitation on circumstances or wait for someone else to open the door for you. That kind of responsibility feels heavy, and it's why so many avoid making the choice at all. They would rather linger in the cage of fear, because at least then they can pretend they are victims of circumstance rather than authors of their destiny. But that false comfort only deepens the cage, locking them into a smaller and smaller existence. When you finally choose your truth, the world doesn't suddenly roll out a red carpet for you. In fact, sometimes it pushes back harder. People may resist your change, doubt your new path, or even mock your courage. But the difference now is that you're no longer seeking their permission. You've already decided. You've already drawn the line in the sand. The moment you choose your truth, external validation loses its grip on you. Whether they cheer you on or try to drag you back, you keep moving because your decision is bigger than their opinion. And here's where something magical happens. Once you make the choice, momentum starts to build. You take the first step, and suddenly the second doesn't seem as impossible. You speak your truth once, and the next time it feels a little stronger, a little clearer. You take one risk, and even if it doesn't go perfectly, you discover that you didn't shatter the way fear told you would. You survived, you grew, you learned. Each action feeds the next, creating a chain reaction that pulls you further and further away from the cage you once thought you could never escape. There is an energy that comes with choosing your truth that no external reward can replicate. It's the deep, grounded knowledge that you are no longer betraying yourself to keep the peace, to fit in, or to avoid failure. You may not control the outcome, but you control the decision. And that ownership fills you with a strength that no amount of applause or recognition could ever replace. Even in failure, there is freedom, because failure on your own terms is better than success built on silence or compromise. Many people believe they need certainty before they act, but the reality is that certainty is a myth. Life will never guarantee you the outcome you want. The only guarantee you have is the truth inside you, the one that refuses to go away no matter how long you ignore it. Choosing that truth, even in uncertainty, is the only way forward. Waiting for certainty is just another form of delay, another excuse dressed up as patience. The real transformation begins when you accept uncertainty and step forward anyway. Every act of greatness, every display of dominance, every unforgettable roar of truth begins with this moment of decision. Not when the fear is gone, not when the doubt is silenced, but when you choose to move forward anyway. That choice is what tears down the illusion of the cage. That choice is what reminds you that you were never as powerless as you thought. That choice is the spark that ignites everything else. And once you've made it, once you've tasted the freedom of living in your truth, you can never go back to the silence of hesitation again. Dominance is one of those words that gets misunderstood. Too often people think it means towering over others, controlling them, or forcing your will on anyone who crosses your path. That picture of dominance is shallow and fragile, because real strength has nothing to do with crushing someone else. True dominance is about owning yourself so completely that no external force can dictate your worth, your choices, or your direction. It's the kind of mastery that doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to prove, and doesn't need to fight every battle, because it's grounded in the knowledge that you already carry everything you need inside of you. Owning yourself doesn't mean pretending you're flawless. It doesn't mean putting on a mask of invincibility so the world never sees you stumble. On the contrary, it's about embracing your flaws, your scars, and your broken places with the same confidence you show in your victories. Dominance is standing in the middle of your chaos and saying, yes, I've failed, yes, I've been hurt, yes, I've made mistakes, and I am still here. That defiance, that refusal to let shame dictate your story, is the foundation of true power. The person who owns their scars can never be blackmailed by them, never be trapped by the judgment of others, because nothing is hidden and nothing is denied. Life leaves marks on everyone. Some try to hide them, polish them away, or bury them deep so no one will know. But the effort of hiding drains you, and the shame of silence makes you weaker, not stronger. Owning your scars flips that weight upside down. Suddenly, what was once a source of pain becomes a badge of resilience. Every time you survived, every time you got back up, every time you thought the world had finished you off, but you stood again, those become the proof of your strength. They are not evidence of weakness, but evidence of endurance. And when you walk with that awareness, people feel it. They sense it in your presence, in your tone, in the way you carry yourself. You don't have to announce it. The truth radiates on its own. Mistakes are another part of this equation. Most people treat mistakes as enemies to be erased, as if perfection were the only acceptable standard. But dominance is not about perfection. It is about perspective. The dominant mindset takes mistakes and reclaims them as teachers, turning them into raw material for wisdom. Every misstep gives you data. Every wrong turn reveals a new angle. When you stop hiding from mistakes and start integrating them into your identity, they cease being stains on your record and become fuel for your evolution. This is why some of the strongest leaders and creators in history are those who failed repeatedly before they broke through. They didn't achieve dominance because they avoided mistakes, but because they transformed them. Chaos is another part of life people fear. Plans fall apart, people betray you, circumstances shift, and you're thrown into situations you never anticipated. The instinct is to fight against the chaos, to try to wrestle it into order, but dominance is different. It doesn't resist chaos. It flows with it, using the energy of disruption to carve new paths. Owning your chaos means refusing to see it as a threat to your identity. You are not defined by your control over circumstances, but by your ability to remain grounded within them. A storm can rage around you, but if you own yourself, you do not collapse with the storm. You adapt, you adjust, you find new strategies, and in doing so, you show that your strength is not tied to conditions, but to character. This kind of dominance cannot be taken away from you because it doesn't depend on anyone else. If your strength comes from being better than others, it can vanish the moment someone outperforms you. If your worth comes from applause, it disappears when the applause dies down. If your confidence comes from everything going your way, it crumbles when life throws its punches. But when your dominance is rooted in self, mastery, when it comes from owning scars, mistakes, and chaos, then no one can strip it from you. Not the critics, not the doubters, not the failures, not even the shifting circumstances of life. You remain unshaken because your power is self-sustaining. People often confuse dominance with arrogance, but the two couldn't be more different. Arrogance is loud, fragile, and always reaching for validation. It needs to be noticed. It needs to be praised. It needs to prove its superiority to feel secure. Dominance, by contrast, is quiet and unshakable. It doesn't need an audience to know its worth. It doesn't need to be declared. It simply exists, and others recognize it instinctively. When you walk into a room with true dominance, you don't have to demand attention. The room adjusts around you because authenticity and resilience carry their own gravity. And this is why owning yourself is the truest form of power. When you stop running from your past, when you stop hiding your mistakes, When you stop fearing the storms of chaos, you stop being controlled by them. You no longer waste energy on pretending or defending, and all that energy can be redirected into creating, building, leading, and living with integrity. That's the essence of dominance. It's not about control over others, but about freedom within yourself. It's the unshakable sense that nothing outside of you can define who you are. The people who live this way don't just survive, they expand. They stop apologizing for existing, stop shrinking themselves to fit expectations, and stop begging for permission to speak their truth. They live in alignment with who they are, and that alignment gives them a presence that cannot be ignored. That is dominance, not in the sense of crushing anyone else, but in the sense of standing so fully in your own being that the world has no choice but to recognize it. Pain is often seen as the enemy, something to avoid at all costs, something to numb, suppress, or run away from. But what most people don't realize is that pain holds a kind of alchemy. It has the ability to turn your deepest wounds into your sharpest weapons, your darkest nights into your brightest lessons, and your lowest points into the very foundation of your strength. What hurts you does not have to define you in weakness. It can instead refine you in power. Pain becomes the raw material that, when processed and owned, transforms into resilience, determination, and an unshakable core. Failure is one of the most common forms of pain, and yet it is also one of the most misunderstood. When people fail, they often internalize the event as a reflection of their worth. They tell themselves they are inadequate, incapable, or unworthy of success. But failure, in truth, is not a verdict. It is feedback. It is life handing you information about what doesn't work so that you can find what does. The sting of failure feels personal, but it is actually directional. Every time you fail, you are given a clearer map of where not to go, which ultimately sharpens your ability to find the right path. Those who learn to view failure not as punishment, but as data are the ones who turn it into fuel. They gather every setback like wood for a fire, and eventually, that fire burns so hot it propels them past those who never dared to fail at all. Bruises, whether physical or emotional, carry a similar paradox. On the surface, they look like weakness, visible reminders that you've been struck. But a bruise is also proof that you endured. It is evidence that you took the hit and yet you're still standing. The body heals, the mind adapts, and what once seemed unbearable becomes something you survived. Every bruise carries a story of resilience, a testimony that you are harder to break than you once believed. In this way, bruises are not blemishes but badges, marking you as someone who can withstand what life throws at them and continue forward regardless. The nights that threaten to break you, the long hours of doubt, grief, or despair, also play a role in this transformation. When you are forced to sit with pain in its rawest form, you encounter truths about yourself you might never face in comfort. You discover just how much you can endure, how deep your well of strength really is, and how resourceful you can become when survival is the only option. These dark moments strip away illusions and pretenses, leaving only the core of who you are. And when you emerge from them, you do so with a deeper knowledge of yourself that can never be taken away. Pain, in this way, becomes a mirror, showing you not just your limits, but also your potential. The process of turning pain into power is not automatic. It requires a decision to confront rather than to hide, to integrate rather than to deny. Many people carry their pain like a burden, dragging it behind them, allowing it to weigh them down. They relive their wounds without ever seeking to learn from them. This approach leaves them bitter, stuck, and defined by the very things they wish they could escape. But those who choose differently, those who choose to face their pain head on, discover that every scar has a lesson, every loss has a teaching, and every heartbreak carries wisdom. They don't deny what happened to them, but they refuse to let it keep them from moving forward. That refusal is what turns the wound into a weapon. Consider how the most compelling leaders, creators, and warriors are often those with the deepest scars. Their strength is not built on a life of ease, but on a life of trials. They speak with weight because they've lived through what others fear. They inspire because they've been in the pit and climbed out. They dominate not because they've avoided pain, but because they've transformed it into power. Their stories resonate because everyone at some level knows pain, and to see someone rise above it proves that it's possible to do the same. This transformation also breeds empathy, another form of strength. When you've experienced pain, you understand the suffering of others on a deeper level. You can connect, inspire, and lead with authenticity because you're not speaking from theory. You're speaking from lived truth. Pain cracks you open, makes you vulnerable, but in that vulnerability lies a bridge to others. That bridge allows you to roar your truth in a way that isn't just about yourself, but also about reminding others of their own resilience. In this way, pain not only empowers you, but also equips you to empower others. The mistake most people make is believing that strength comes from avoiding pain, but the opposite is true. Real strength is forged in fire, shaped under pressure, and tested by trials. It's not built in the moments when everything is easy, but in the moments when everything is falling apart, and you choose to rise anyway. Every tear, every setback, every bruise, every failure is part of the process of becoming unbreakable. By embracing the pain instead of running from it, you harness the energy that once threatened to destroy you and convert it into the fuel that drives you forward. What once seemed like the end becomes the beginning. What once felt unbearable becomes unforgettable proof of your resilience, and what once appeared as weakness becomes your crown. Pain, when faced, doesn't diminish you. It refines you, strengthens you, and prepares you for a kind of power that comfort could never provide. It becomes the very foundation upon which dominance is built, because no one who has truly turned pain into power can ever again be controlled by it. Conformity is one of the most subtle traps that people fall into, because it doesn't present itself as a threat. On the surface, it looks like security, it looks like belonging, it looks like a safe path carved out by countless others before you. From the time we are children, the message is hammered into us: fit in, follow the rules, don't stand out too much, don't rock the boat. And while some level of social structure is necessary, the danger comes when conformity begins to erode authenticity. When the voice inside you is drowned out by the expectations outside of you, you end up living a life that feels safe but empty, controlled but meaningless. The tragedy is not that people fail by trying to be themselves, but that so many never even attempt it because they've been convinced that being an echo is easier than being a voice. The world has no shortage of echoes. Social media is filled with them, schools produce them, workplaces reward them. People repeating the same phrases, adopting the same lifestyles, chasing the same definitions of success without ever stopping to ask whether those definitions align with who they truly are. It's a conveyor belt existence, designed to churn out uniformity in a world that desperately needs originality. The problem with being an echo is that echoes fade. They are forgettable because they bring nothing new. They are background noise in a world already drowning in noise. Authenticity, on the other hand, cuts through like lightning. It cannot be ignored because it carries a resonance that only truth can produce. Living authentically is not easy. It requires courage to strip away the layers of conditioning that have been placed on you since birth. It demands that you question authority, challenge expectations, and risk the rejection of those who want you to stay inside the mold. Authenticity has a cost because not everyone will celebrate your truth. Some will criticize, some will mock, and some will leave. But the reward far outweighs the risk. When you live authentically, you stop betraying yourself for the comfort of others. You stop silencing the voice inside you that has been waiting for permission to speak. You discover a freedom that conformity could never provide. There's a rawness to authenticity that makes it powerful. It isn't polished, it isn't rehearsed. It isn't about saying what people want to hear. It's about saying what you need to say, living how you need to live, and being who you actually are, even when it's messy, even when it's inconvenient. That rawness carries weight because people recognize it instantly. They may not always agree with you, but they will feel the undeniable force of someone who is living their truth. And in a world drowning in scripted personas, that force is magnetic. It inspires others to consider their own suppressed truths, to wonder if maybe they too could break free from the mold. Authenticity is also the key to lasting impact. Conformity might earn you temporary approval, but it rarely earns respect. People respect those who dare to be different, those who stand firm in who they are even when it costs them something. Think of the voices throughout history that changed the course of culture, art, science, or politics. None of them did so by blending in. They did it by refusing to be echoes. They roared their truth, often at great personal cost, and in doing so they carved new possibilities into the fabric of the world. Their authenticity outlived them because truth has a way of resonating across generations. The fear that holds people back from authenticity usually boils down to judgment. The human need for acceptance runs deep, and stepping outside the mold often triggers anxiety about being cast out. But here's the paradox: when you conform, you might gain acceptance, but you lose yourself. When you live authentically, you might lose some acceptance, but you gain yourself. And in gaining yourself, you attract the kind of relationships, opportunities, and experiences that are aligned with your truth. The ones you lose were never truly yours because they were built on a false version of you. The ones you gain will be deeper, stronger, and more fulfilling because they are built on the real you. Authenticity also demands responsibility. When you choose to live your truth, you can no longer hide behind the excuse of "this is just how things are." You can no longer blame society, your family, or the system for the choices you make. You become accountable for aligning your actions with your values. This level of responsibility can feel heavy, but it is also liberating. It means your life is truly yours. Every step you take, every word you speak, every decision you make carries the stamp of your identity. That kind of ownership transforms not only how you see yourself, but also how others see you. There is also a resilience that comes with authenticity. When you live as an echo, criticism shatters you because your identity depends on the approval of others. When you live authentically, criticism cannot touch you in the same way because you are not seeking validation. You are expressing truth. Truth doesn't need approval to be valid. It stands on its own. This resilience allows you to move through life with a strength that conformity can never provide. You are no longer swayed by every opinion, no longer silenced by every disapproving glance. You walk in your own skin, and that alone is an act of dominance. In the end, the choice between conformity and authenticity is a choice between invisibility and legacy. Conformity ensures you blend in, that you never rock the boat, that you are remembered, if at all, as one more voice in the crowd. Authenticity ensures that even if you face resistance, even if you walk alone, you leave a mark that cannot be erased. Because when you roar your truth, it echoes not just in your own life, but in the lives of everyone who hears it and feels permission to roar their own. Your roar is your power. It's not about volume for the sake of noise, and it's not about being louder than everyone else in the room. It's about resonance, the kind of sound that vibrates straight from the gut and leaves no doubt that what you're saying comes from a place of truth. A whisper can roar if it carries conviction, and a shout can fall flat if it's hollow. The roar I'm talking about is the unapologetic expression of who you are, unfiltered, unmasked, and unashamed. It's the moment when you stop asking for permission to exist as yourself, and you claim the space you've always been worthy of occupying. Most people spend their lives speaking carefully rehearsed lines, designed to be palatable, agreeable, and safe. Their words are calculated to avoid conflict, to please, to fit the mold, but a roar cannot be calculated. A roar is raw. It's the surge of your inner fire refusing to be tamed any longer. It's what happens when your truth is too heavy to be hidden, when the weight of silence becomes unbearable. That sound carries power because it isn't crafted to be liked. It is forced out by the undeniable need to be heard. And once it leaves your chest, it carries with it the strength of your entire journey. The failures, the scars, the doubts, and the victories. A roar has a way of cutting through the static of the world. In a time when everyone is bombarded with endless chatter, distractions, and voices vying for attention, most of what people hear blends into the background. But a roar doesn't blend, it pierces. It commands attention, not by demanding it, but by being impossible to ignore. People may not even agree with what you're saying, but they will feel it. They will sense the authenticity dripping from it, and that is what makes it powerful. It's not persuasion, it's presence. The roar is the embodiment of presence, the undeniable force of someone who has claimed their truth and dares to put it into the world without apology. Your roar isn't just for others, it's for yourself. When you roar your truth, you are reminding yourself that your voice matters. You are proving to yourself that you have the courage to stand in who you are, even when it's uncomfortable. That act of self-expression becomes fuel. It strengthens you every time you do it, and it slowly rewires the way you see yourself. Instead of shrinking in the face of doubt, you expand. Instead of retreating into silence, you step forward with sound. It becomes a cycle of empowerment. The more you roar, the stronger you feel, and the stronger you feel, the more you roar. People often think of power as domination, as control over others, but the roar teaches you that true power comes from liberation. The moment you express yourself without apology, you free yourself from the prison of external validation. You stop waiting for someone else to acknowledge you, because you've already acknowledged yourself. You stop trying to mold your voice into something acceptable, because your truth is already worthy of being heard exactly as it is. That kind of freedom terrifies those who still live in silence, but it inspires them too, because deep down, everyone knows they have a roar of their own buried inside. Hearing yours can wake theirs. It's important to understand that your roar doesn't have to sound like anyone else's. Some people roar with words, some with art, some with leadership, some with quiet but unshakable conviction. What matters is not the form, but the authenticity. Comparison is the death of the roar. The moment you start measuring your expression against someone else's, you choke the sound before it leaves your chest. Your roar is not supposed to mimic, it's supposed to reveal, and what it reveals is the unrepeatable essence of you. That's why it has power, because no one else on this planet can roar what you can. A roar also carries responsibility. Once you unleash it, you cannot take it back, and it will ripple through the world in ways you may not expect. Some will resist it. Some will try to silence it. Some will misinterpret it. But that is not your concern. Your responsibility is not to manage how people react to your truth, but to keep speaking it anyway. The roar is not about control, it's about release. It's about letting the truth inside you find its way into the world, trusting that those who need to hear it will hear it, and those who don't were never meant to. There will be moments when you feel tempted to silence your roar again, when the fear of rejection or misunderstanding creeps back in. That's natural. But the key is to remember that silence is a greater prison than judgment. Every time you choose silence over expression, you diminish yourself. Every time you roar, you expand. The world may not always applaud, but you will always know you honored yourself. That knowing is worth more than any approval, because it builds a foundation of self-respect that no one can take from you. The roar is not a single act, but a way of life. It's the decision every day to show up in truth rather than hide in fear. It's choosing to speak the words that matter even when your voice shakes. It's choosing to live in alignment even when it costs you comfort. It's choosing to be unforgettable rather than unnoticed. And the more you live this way, the more natural it becomes. The roar stops being something you do occasionally and starts being who you are. It becomes your signature, your rhythm, your identity. When you roar your truth, you create a world in which others feel permission to do the same. Your courage becomes contagious. Your authenticity becomes a spark that lights fires in those who have been too afraid to speak, too afraid to act, too afraid to live. That is the ripple effect of power. It multiplies. What started as a single roar from your chest can become a chorus of voices, a movement of truth, a storm of authenticity breaking down the walls of conformity, and all of it begins with the simple, brave act of refusing to stay silent. Doubt never vanishes completely. It's not something you kill once and for all, as if one great victory over it means it will never return. Doubt is stubborn, slippery, and persistent. It lingers in the corners of your mind, waiting for moments of weakness, waiting for times when you're tired, when you've failed, or when the world has just knocked you down. It whispers in your ear when you least expect it, telling you that maybe you were wrong to believe in yourself, that maybe your roar wasn't loud enough, that maybe the world doesn't really need your truth after all. And if you aren't ready for it, those whispers can be convincing. But the reality is, doubt is not the enemy to be destroyed. It's the adversary to be outroared again and again. Every time you rise, doubt rises with you. That's its nature. Doubt feeds on progress. The higher you climb, the louder it gets, because it thrives on reminding you of every possible way you could fall. When you start something new, it will be there. When you achieve something great, it will be there. When you're about to cross a line you've never crossed before, it will be there. The mistake most people make is believing that doubt is a sign they should stop. They hear that voice and assume it means they're not ready, not good enough, not capable. But the truth is, doubt shows up precisely because you're moving forward. If you were standing still, if you were wasting your life in silence and stagnation, doubt would have nothing to attack. Its very presence is proof that you are on the edge of something significant. The challenge then is not to silence doubt, but to answer it, and the answer is always your roar. Doubt will say you're not enough. Your roar must say I am more than enough. Doubt will say you will fail. Your roar must say failure is fuel, not death. Doubt will say no one cares. Your roar must say I care, and that is enough. It's a battle of voices, and the one that wins is the one you choose to amplify. You cannot control whether doubt shows up, but you can control whether it takes the microphone. Part of the reason doubt is so powerful is because it knows your history. It knows where you've been weak before, where you've stumbled, where you've bled. It uses that knowledge against you, replaying your mistakes like a broken record. But what doubt underestimates is your ability to reinterpret that history. Every mistake it throws at you can be reframed as a lesson, every failure as a foundation, every scar as proof of survival. When you learn to see your past not as evidence against you, but as ammunition for you, doubt loses its sting. The same experiences it tries to use to weaken you become the very reasons you are unstoppable. Doubt is also relentless because it wears many disguises. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's procrastination, sometimes it's perfectionism. It tells you to wait until you're ready, wait until it's perfect, wait until the stars align. But waiting is its trap. Because readiness is a myth, perfection is impossible, and the stars will never fully align. The only way to move is to act in the face of doubt, to roar while it's whispering, to keep pushing even as it claws at your heels. Action is the antidote to doubt. Every step forward proves it wrong. Every act of courage weakens its hold. Another way doubt tries to control you is through comparison. It points out what others are doing, how far ahead they seem, how polished they appear, and it tells you that you'll never measure up. But comparison is just another form of silence. It convinces you to dim your roar because someone else's roar sounds different. What doubt doesn't want you to remember is that no roar can replace your own. No matter how powerful someone else seems, their truth does not erase yours. The world isn't asking for one voice, it's asking for many. And yours adds something no one else can. Even the strongest people are not immune to doubt. Heroes, leaders, innovators, all of them have faced it. The difference is, they refuse to bow to it. They felt it, they heard it, but they answered it. That's why their legacies last. They didn't wait until doubt disappeared, they learned to move with it. They realized that doubt was not a stop sign, but a signal that they were entering new territory, territory that required growth. If they had waited until they felt completely ready, they would have waited forever. Instead, they roared louder, louder than the fear, louder than the lies, louder than the doubt itself. There is also a strange gift in doubt. It keeps you from complacency. It challenges you to strengthen your roar, to sharpen your conviction, to keep proving to yourself that you mean what you say. Without doubt, you might drift into arrogance, believing you no longer need to push, no longer need to grow. Doubt humbles you, but it also tests you. It forces you to decide, again and again, if you will choose truth over fear. And each time you do, you build resilience, confidence, and unshakable presence. When doubt comes knocking, it's not the end of your dominance. It's the test of it. The roar is not meant to be a one-time declaration. It's meant to be a continual response to the forces that try to silence you. The goal is not to erase doubt from your life, but to live in such a way that doubt never has the final word. You become the kind of person who expects it, who almost welcomes it, because you know it gives you another chance to roar even louder. And every time you do, your dominance grows, not in the sense of controlling others, but in the sense of mastering yourself. So when doubt shows up, and it will, don't be surprised, don't be discouraged, and don't waste your energy trying to banish it. Recognize it for what it is, a shadow that only exists because you are standing in the light. And when it whispers, don't argue, don't beg, don't cower, roar. Roar so loud that doubt shrinks back into the corners where it belongs. And then keep moving forward. Because dominance is not the absence of doubt, but the decision to outshine it every single time. Crossing the line from doubt to dominance is not a temporary rush or a fleeting moment of courage. It's a transformation that rewires the way you move through the world. Once you've experienced the power of your roar, once you've tasted the freedom that comes from standing in your truth, you cannot go back to who you were before. There is no retreat, because the cage of doubt that once confined you has been shattered, and trying to fit back into it would be like trying to shrink yourself into a space you've outgrown. The shift is permanent, and with permanence comes both liberation and responsibility. The moment you cross that line, you see life differently. The doubts that used to feel like walls now look like smoke. The obstacles that once paralyzed you lose their power, because you recognize that fear is nothing more than a signal that you are moving into new territory. You start to understand that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to bow to it. This perspective doesn't fade once you've lived it. It stays embedded in you. Even if you stumble, even if doubt returns to whisper in your ear, you can't unlearn what you've discovered. You know your roar exists. You know your truth has power. You know you are capable of stepping into dominance, and that knowledge changes everything. It is like crossing from darkness into light. Once your eyes adjust, you cannot return to blindness. You cannot pretend you didn't see what you saw, or that the light wasn't real. Dominance is like that. It alters your vision permanently. You see yourself differently, not as someone at the mercy of doubt, but as someone who can master it. That shift in identity is irreversible. You are no longer the person who waits for permission, who hides behind excuses, who silences themselves to fit in. You've stepped into a new version of yourself, and that version refuses to be caged again. There will be moments when the pull of the past tries to drag you back. People who knew you before may want you to remain the same, to keep playing small, to stay within the limits they are comfortable with. They may resent your transformation because it forces them to confront their own silence. But the line you've crossed cannot be uncrossed. You can't unknow your strength. You can't pretend you don't hear the sound of your own roar echoing in your chest. Even if you try to play small again, the truth will gnaw at you, demanding to be unleashed. Once you've lived in authenticity, conformity tastes like poison. Dominance, in this sense, is not about control over others. It's about owning yourself completely. It's about reaching a place where your truth is no longer negotiable. Before you cross the line, you might have bargained with doubt, trying to find compromises, trying to silence your voice just enough to stay safe while still hoping to feel fulfilled. But after you've stepped into dominance, there is no more bargaining. You don't negotiate your truth. You don't ask if it's acceptable. You live it. That commitment solidifies the transformation, because you've stopped playing on doubt's terms. You've created your own terms, and they are non-negotiable. What also changes once you cross that line is the way you deal with failure. Before, failure might have felt like proof that doubt was right, as if stumbling confirmed that you weren't capable. But after the shift, failure becomes fuel. It becomes part of the process of sharpening your roar, part of the rhythm of growth. Instead of breaking you, it strengthens you. You realize that dominance is not perfection. It's persistence. It's the refusal to stay down when life knocks you down, and because of that, failure loses its power to define you. It becomes something you use, not something that uses you. The permanence of this transformation also lies in the relationships you build afterward. Once you are living in dominance, the people who are drawn to you are not the ones who want you muted, but the ones who respect and resonate with your truth. You begin to attract connections that are rooted in authenticity rather than pretense. The shallow relationships that were built on who you pretended to be fall away, and in their place come deeper, more meaningful bonds. These new connections reinforce your transformation because they surround you with people who see and accept you for who you really are. It becomes even harder to go back to hiding when you are surrounded by those who thrive on your authenticity. Crossing the line also means stepping into influence, whether you want it or not. Your roar doesn't just affect you. It affects everyone who hears it. By standing in your truth, you give others permission to do the same. Your courage becomes an example, your authenticity becomes a spark, and your resilience becomes a map. You may not even realize the impact you're having, but the very act of living in dominance ripples outward. And that ripple effect creates a responsibility. You understand that your roar is no longer just about you, it's about the world it touches. That responsibility cements your transformation, because you're no longer fighting only for yourself, but for everyone who needs to see what's possible. Once you've crossed the line, silence becomes unbearable. You can't go back to swallowing your words, to shrinking in rooms, to disguising your truth. Even if doubt returns, and it will, you now have a weapon it cannot take away, the memory of your roar. You know what it feels like to step into your power, and that memory alone is enough to pull you forward again and again. Dominance doesn't mean you never feel weak, but it does mean you never stay weak. It means you always rise, always roar, always return to truth. The permanence of crossing this line is what makes it so life-changing. It's not just about achieving something once. It's about becoming someone new. A person who no longer sees doubt as a master, but as a reminder of how far they've come. A person who no longer silences themselves for the comfort of others, but speaks because they must. A person who doesn't retreat into the shadows but stands in the light, knowing it will expose them, challenge them, and even cost them, but also knowing that it is the only way to live fully alive. And once you've lived that way, you will never again be satisfied with anything less. The legacy is not built from silence, and it is not crafted from blending into the background. Legacy is carved when a voice refuses to be muted, when truth roars into the world and refuses to be taken back. Your truth, once spoken, leaves an imprint, whether you realize it or not. Words have weight, and actions rooted in authenticity create ripples that travel farther than you ever intended. That is the essence of a roar. It echoes beyond you, beyond the moment, beyond the walls that tried to contain it. And once the echo begins, the world cannot unhear it. Most people live as though their lives are temporary drafts, hesitant to leave a mark in case they make a mistake. They erase, they rewrite, they apologize for every line, hoping for approval, hoping not to offend, hoping to pass through unnoticed. But the cost of that kind of living is invisibility. It leaves no legacy, only a faint outline that disappears with time. To roar your truth is to decide that your life will not be a draft. It will be bold ink on the page, permanent, unapologetic, imperfect, but undeniably real. That permanence is where legacy begins, because people do not remember the ones who stayed silent. They remember the ones who spoke even when their voice shook. Your legacy of truth is not measured by how many people applaud you, but by how many people feel something when you roar. The impact of truth cannot always be quantified. Sometimes it inspires one person to change. Sometimes it shakes an entire generation awake. The scale does not matter. The resonance does. What matters is that you are brave enough to put your truth into the world, to risk misunderstanding, criticism, or rejection for the sake of authenticity. That bravery becomes part of your legacy because it shows others that courage is possible. A roar has longevity because it carries the weight of conviction. Empty words fade quickly, but words rooted in truth endure. They are passed down, repeated, quoted, remembered. They become part of the cultural fabric because people sense the reality in them. Think about the lines from history, the phrases that outlived their speakers. They endure not because they were clever, but because they were true. When you roar your truth, you step into that lineage of voices that will not be silenced, voices that live on in the echoes they leave behind. The legacy of your roar is not just in words, but in how you lived. People may forget what you said, but they will never forget how your authenticity made them feel. They will remember the energy you carried, the way you stood unapologetically in your own skin, the way you refused to shrink. They will remember the times you chose honesty over convenience, courage over comfort, resilience over retreat. Those choices create memories in others, and those memories become part of your legacy. Even long after you're gone, the impression of your roar will remain in the stories people tell, in the examples they use, in the inspiration they draw from your life. The beauty of legacy is that you don't get to control it completely. Once your roar leaves your chest, it belongs to the world. People will interpret it in their own ways, use it for their own journeys, apply it to their own struggles. That is the power of truth. It adapts, it travels, it transforms. Your roar might be born from your own pain, your own fight, your own triumph, but it will resonate with others in ways you may never even witness. That ripple effect stretches farther than your lifetime, embedding itself into futures you will never see. A legacy also demands consistency. One roar can change a moment, but repeated roars create momentum. Every time you choose authenticity over conformity, every time you raise your voice when silence would be easier, every time you live aligned with your truth, you add to the echo. The more you roar, the deeper the imprint becomes. Legacy is not built in a single act of bravery, but in a lifetime of them. It is built in the daily decision to live as you are, not as others expect you to be. There is also defiance in the legacy of truth. To roar your truth is to declare that you will not be erased. It is to stand against the forces that want you silent: fear, doubt, conformity, and even the critics who try to cut you down. That defiance becomes part of the mark you leave, because it shows that dominance is not about never facing resistance, but about refusing to bow to it. The world may try to quiet your roar, but if you keep speaking, if you keep living authentically, you outlast the noise. Time always exposes what was real, and authenticity always survives. What makes a legacy of truth powerful is its ability to inspire others to create their own. Your roar is not an endpoint, it is a beginning for someone else. When people hear your truth, they may find the courage to speak theirs. When they see you living boldly, they may feel permission to step into their own authenticity. In this way, your roar multiplies, echoing not only in your life, but in the lives it awakens. A legacy is not just about what you leave behind. It's about what continues to grow because of you. Crossing from doubt to dominance means understanding that your truth is not disposable. It is not a passing moment. It is a force that lingers, that outlives fear, that carves its way into memory. When you roar your truth, you build something permanent, something that no critic, no silence, no doubt can erase. The world cannot unhear it. The people who felt it cannot unfeel it. And that is the ultimate form of dominance. Not control over others, but influence that endures long after the roar itself has faded from your lips. Doubt will always try to creep back. Fear will always try to build new cages. But once you've roared your truth, the world can never silence it again.